Today, we're going to talk about the fabric of trust, what is so important when we are actually building human connection. This is one of my favorite topics, so I am very excited to share it with you guys today. This is part of the 2024 Elevate and Illuminate Organizational Excellence Bloom Masterclass series. You can find all of the other segments on the Bloom Vault. So Sam will make sure that that happens. So let's get to it today. All right, so we are going to talk today about emotional intelligence and how it serves us in the capacity to build bonds and communication and relationships in professional environments. Trust is the cornerstone for human connection, and a lot of us fail to drive meaningful, purpose-driven human connection, and a lot of that can stem from how we approach things from an emotional intelligence standpoint. So today, we're going to talk through a little bit of this. I am going to ask for some interpersonal chit chat among the group because a lot of this is going to get better if we can use real world examples. So I'm very excited to be able to spend this time with you guys. It's going to be wonderful. All right, let's keep going. If you have not met me before, my name is Dr. Claire Muselman. Welcome to having. I love having you guys here, part of my masterclass. I'm a human behavior scientist. I study all things related to human behavior. I really wanted to understand the deeper connections that go into people and why we behave the way we do and what connections do we actually need to have in order to foster development, foster trust, foster those connection-oriented type segments. So I've done a lot of studying on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Herzberg's two-factor theory. I teach at Drake University, came from the workers' compensation space, still there, trying to help make good things happen for people. But all of that stems through the study of human behavior. What do people need from a connection standpoint now more than ever? Something else that I think is really relevant as we talk about how do we foster trust through emotional intelligence. We are in a loneliness and isolation epidemic right now. The Surgeon General produced a report last year in 2023 talking about how we are lonelier than we have ever been before. Now, I want you to think about this in terms of your day-to-day life. Who do you talk to? Who do you see? And again, just trying to take a little bit of self-awareness around this because post-pandemic, we have changed a lot about how we behave and interact with one another, which is why this is such a crucial topic to focus on. In addition to that, if you think about, we are working in a global workforce more than we ever have before. We are more connected in theory than we've ever been before. And there's 20 plus social media channels that we can all stay connected and know what's going on with people. Yet at the root core of everything, we're missing that human connection. And I think if we go back to and we really dig into what is transpiring from that, focusing on the emotional intelligence elements, as well as focusing on the trust component that goes into this, we can understand why we are in this space and also what do we do to foster these innate bonds of human connection. So that's where we're headed today. All right, here's our first quote on trust. Trust is the glue of life. It is the foundational principle that holds all relationships. Stephen Covey talks about this. So if I just reiterated to you guys that we've got over 20 social media channels. One of the greatest things about social media is that you can't trust it. Very funny from the fact that like back when Facebook first came around back in 2004, we started seeing people's lives on a regular basis and we started to see what we wanted people to see. And so when we think about social media and its implications in trust and relationships, how much can we actually trust that that is the true purpose or the true meaning behind things that people are posting? You know, pictures are subject to interpretation. Words can have different meanings, and we start to think about how we've projected ourselves or portrayed ourselves in the social world. Think about what that looks like for you. Then New York Times had a study done last summer where they talked about the difference in content that is on Instagram and TikTok and how valid is this? Is the information that is being displayed on TikTok and Instagram true? And it was like a whopping 76% has some type of falseness to it. So just some things to think about when we figure out like, why is trust so important? And why are we caring so much now when we're trying to focus on, all right, how do we build these deep, meaningful connections? So just some things that I want you guys to think about as we look at the warped reality that we live in when we look at the social connections within people and why this emotional intelligence component is so important. So first, let's define emotional intelligence. Does anyone want to give me an example? Feel free to put it in the chat, or if you guys want to take yourself off of mute, I would love to hear, how do you define emotional intelligence?
Hey Claire, it's Debbie.
Hey, Debbie.
For me, it's how your awareness of self and your awareness of other people and how they perceive you, and how aware of that are you.
Awesome. I could not have said that better myself. Thank you, Debbie. And Erin Quinn Stevens, hello. Puts in the chat, understanding your own emotions and others around you. Those are great. Thank you guys so much for that. All right, so we start to dive into emotional intelligence. So our ability to connect with another human being is very important to think about how we first start to connect with ourselves, understanding our emotions, what triggers us, what brings us joy, how we're received, how we're perceived. We've got to understand that because it allows us the ability to see that in other people. And when we start going down the emotional intelligence route, there's different components that make up emotional intelligence that we'll get to. But empathy is a big piece of emotionally intelligent people. And the ability to understand empathy in someone else only extends to the amount that we understand it within ourselves. So offering ourselves grace, compassion, and support directly translate into how much we offer that to other people, which can be a big thing. So when we start to look at this and we think about emotional intelligence, I want you to think about how you receive and perceive your own emotions, because this is where we start to build this foundation. And I do a lot of work on that self-reflection route, but for you to understand how we're supposed to build trust with other people, we do have to focus on those elements of, do we trust ourselves? Think about that. When you're making decisions, do you stick with your gut instinct? When you're making decisions, how often do you evaluate data? Then are you comfortable changing your position when you get new data? How often are you rethinking things and expanding your viewpoints, expanding your knowledge, understanding that every conversation and every presentation offers you an opportunity to expand your thinking process or to expand the perception or the reality that somebody else might have. And so when we start to look at this and we look at why emotional intelligence is so important, we want to think about, when we're connecting to other people, how connected are we really at understanding ourselves? I did a conflict workshop not that long ago where we were talking about why conflict exists. And conflict usually arises as a result of somebody violating your value or contradicting your value. And it makes us like agitated. We feel emotions that we don't like. We might have a physiological response. And so I give the example of, I don't like sitting in traffic. I choose to live in Iowa. And in Iowa, I don't want to sit in bumper to bumper traffic like I would be living in downtown Atlanta. So I joke about that, but it helps me relate this to the human experience, because I get physiologically agitated when I have to sit in traffic because I value time as the only currency, and I value independence or autonomy. So traffic is something that I cannot control. Now I can control my response to it, but figuring out like, why does that actually like make me upset? Well, I don't love that I have to, what I would consider, waste my time. I don't like when I feel that my time is being wasted. I'm very intentional with my time. Again, I view time as the only currency. But when we start to dig into, okay, so why does that upset you? Why does that agitate you? We start to understand our emotions behind it. It gives us more power to understand. And this is where we create empathy within ourselves and empathy within others. Now, I'm very well aware as also that I could leave earlier. There are ways that I can avoid this, but it is something that I have been diving into because I'm like, okay, what else can I do? So now I have special playlists that I like to play and sing really loud to, like Ace of Base, for those of you that can go back to, things along those lines, but figuring out what that is. Now, when you're able to understand that at a deeper level and understand that those emotions can exist when people are violating your values or situations are, then you get the power to figure out, okay, Now I get to choose what to do with that. I know this upsets me. I know this makes me feel at this capacity. Now I'm going to take the power of choice. I'm going to take my agency of control back and figure out what I'm going to do with that. Okay. Because it's inevitable these days. Now, what steps can I put in place to recognize that this is going to happen within myself, give myself a little bit of grace, and then figure out what do we do next? So, things to think about as we start to look at how emotional intelligence plays into the bigger story with this. So, let's talk about the components of emotional intelligence. This is specific to how we're going to interact with other people and how we build this framework. Motivation is a component of emotional intelligence as well, but that's not really what we're talking about today. So we're taking the other four that are important elements of this so that we can understand what we need throughout this process. So self-awareness is number one in the emotional intelligence spectrum. And it's funny because we aren't very self-aware. It's like a single digit percentage of how many people are actually self-aware. And so when we start to do this reflection of figuring out, okay, how am I perceived? How am I received? When do I use tone? That's a really interesting one when you start to really dig into that. I want to get to know myself better. I want to understand what sets me off. What are my triggers? And how do I deal with this moving forward? You might find some good, some bad, some ugly, a little bit of the, oh, I don't love that. Like, for example, if I get frustrated, I know I have a tone in my voice that I know my daughter and my partner don't absolutely love. And they have been really kind to offer me the feedback when I start to get this tone. But it helps me be more self-aware, helps me regulate my emotions throughout that. And so, sometimes we are more open to receiving this kind of information and other times we are not. But self-awareness is a superpower. Also, like, what makes you feel good? What are those things that you can do to help change if you're in a mood? So I'm going to use the car example again. So when I'm sitting in traffic, I know I get to choose my mood and I can change it at any point. So I know that if I'm going to need to shift my mood before I'm going to either teach a class or maybe have a meeting or go meet somebody for coffee or lunch or whatever that's going to be, I have the power to do something with that. So again, if my emotions are in a negative construct because of the traffic situation, I can throw on some music that's upbeat and put myself in a better mood. So again, we can start to recognize, okay, when a situation like this happens, this is how I feel, and this is what I do about it. The big kicker with self-awareness that we don't give enough credit to is it's not enough for lip service. You have to actually put something in place to change your behavioral action. So super great where it says, where we have self-awareness, and I apologize, I do not love this slide. I did this incorrectly, but it's okay. We'll keep going with it. We've got self-awareness, but then there's also the second component. So the slide should say self-regulation. So great that you can be aware of this. Great that you can have these awareness elements to it, but without doing something with it, okay, cool, you're aware. Now what? And this is where we always say that, self-awareness is a superpower and it's also step one. Awareness is the first step, but then it's what you do with that. So then we move into self-regulation should be that second component. And I will adjust these before I send it out to you guys so you have a copy of this. Self-regulation is really important. How do you regulate your emotions? How do you understand them? How do you use them? And how do you manage them in a positive way? This is where we want to use this so that we can understand this is how I'm received. This is what I'm feeling. This is what's going on with me. And I want to leave the people around me better. If we're building trust and we're trying to build these relationships, you got to regulate yourself on this. And I like to think of this as offering it as respect as a two-way street. So it is my obligation and responsibility to regulate my emotions and my feelings when I'm going to interact with other people, because I need to offer people the respect of that positive intent. Now, I think it is a two-way street. So this is where I say, like, I'll offer you just as much respect as you offer me. It is my obligation and responsibility to regulate my emotions, to be respectful towards you. But that's also the same thing it's the same thing in return. You should also do that back. And this is where we start to see people that we're not looking at a specific issue when a conflict arises. We end up going more, well, that person always does that, or that person, and we use these qualifiers that say like always or never, and we start to get frustrated more about the scenario versus the specific issue at hand. And so when we're trying to self-regulate, this is where we pay attention to the specific issue. What are those emotions that are surrounding us? What do we do in this moment? And then what action can we take to regulate it? So if we go back to my driving example with, what am I going to do? So if I know I'm starting to get heated, I'm going to take the action of putting on some music and putting myself in a better mood. Daniel Huberman from the Huberman podcast actually has a really good episode that talks about how music can help your brain and how it can improve your mood or it helps you process emotions. So I'm a big believer in this. I think it absolutely works. It helps you shift your perspective and all of those things that come in the line with that. And so we listen to music at 160 beats per minute or above, or whatever is going to do that's going to bring me joy that I know in 3 to 5 minutes, I'm going to be in a more positive mindset. Maybe it might be something specific to the lyrics. I like to dance, so I like to dance around in my car, whatever that looks like. That's going to be really important for those elements. Then we go into social awareness, and social awareness is an interesting one as well. So we understand if we're at this point now, we've got our self-awareness and we have our self-regulation. Now, how are we in specific social situations? Some of us tend to be much more extroverted and some of us tend to be much more introverted. Either way is great. That's who you are, and it's totally wonderful in that perspective. Now, we have to figure out when we are trying to build trust and we're trying to build bonds with other human beings, where is that focal point going to be and how can you use this to your advantage? So let's say that you're an introvert and you do not like being around people that much. Maybe post-pandemic, we get really, really introverted and we like our alone time. We still have to push ourselves out of those boundaries at some points to be able to build bonds and trust and transparency with other people. The face-to-face interaction goes like without question is probably one of the most important things that you can do to start establishing human connection. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm not saying that you can't do that through telephone, you can't do that through screens, but the power of energy that is exchanged between people through face-to-face interaction or a handshake is about 3 hours of the energy that is exchanged within a telephone call. And so when we start to understand why this stuff ends up being really important and making the most of our time, this is where we focus on, all right, how much time, energy, and effort do you want to spend when you have to go be put into social situations? Understanding your battery, what is going to fuel you? How much time do you need? What's that recharge going to look like? And when we can play jokes on ourselves or, play some little games with ourselves and our minds and talk about how our social awareness, like, okay, I got about 15, 20 minutes that I can actually like push myself into this. I'm going to go be vibrant. I'm going to go be out there. I'm going to work the room and then I'm going to retreat. Or I've got this big meeting. I need to present myself cool, calm, collected, polished, even though I might be freaking out on the inside. If we can give ourselves like little micro goals, like I'm going to go to this networking event and I'm going to do my very best for 15 minutes and then I'm going to reevaluate where I'm at. And we start to understand what does that feel like? Because if we're able to regulate our batteries in this emotional intelligence space, understanding our self-regulation here and how we are perceived and received in social situations, this can really help us. Now, this is where we also have to pay attention into reading the room. Okay, we understand that not everyone is wired to go be out there and be charismatic and fantastic and awesome and make people feel welcome and amazing at all times. So this is where we start to pay attention to our own awareness. What situations do you thrive in? So if you're somebody that doesn't drink alcohol, maybe you don't go to networking events that are at a bar. Maybe you're somebody that does well first thing in the morning. So maybe coffees, breakfast, those type of events are going to be better for you. When you start to pay attention to, okay, where do I feel my best? Again, here we go. It's taking a look internally first before we go externally. This can be really helpful. And this is where we start to really focus on that self, that sense of self, and how we go and portray it into others, because this is how we start to build those bonds with other people by focusing on those components of emotional intelligence. And this is really important. There's also the fourth piece that, again, I have an issue on my slides, but it should say relationship management. So we have our self-awareness, we understand the self-regulation. We also understand some of the social awareness. The more that we understand the social awareness components within ourselves, the better we are at then building the relationships and doing the relationship management. So if we know we tend to be introverted people or we tend to be extroverted people, we can offer that grace to other people, understanding that maybe some people just aren't as outgoing as others, or we understand that the energy is going to be different at specific times of the day. Or if we're in a large group or a small group, or we're in a board meeting or we're in a team meeting, that different people are going to have different elements that are going to be more specific to them that makes them feel good in those situations. And as leaders, we need to figure out how we can bring out the best in other people. This is where we talk about creating psychologically safe spaces. This is where people can actually be themselves without a fear of retribution, or that there's going to be any retaliation for them coming in as their full selves. So this is important from the social awareness standpoint. Then if we go into that relationship management, let's be very clear here. Relationships take work. The relationship with yourself takes work. The relationship with other people takes work. They are investments. And again, I told you that time is the only currency that I truly pay attention to these days. Who I spend my time with matters. Who you spend your time with matters. And when we start to look at the relationship management component of emotional intelligence, I want you to think of your energy bank. We have heard that people can be two things. You can either be a fountain that pours into other people, or you're a drain that sucks the energy. Like, think of energy vampires. When we are paying attention to the relationship management component piece of emotional intelligence and how that plays into our building trust, we want to think about who are we trying to build the trust with and where are we at on an energy perspective. You can feel these people, whether they are those illuminators that are pouring those fountains of just great energy. You leave interactions with these people feeling inspired and empowered that you can go take on the world. And then there's those other people that are those energy vampires, that are those drains that kind of suck all that energy out. And it's a lot harder to manage a relationship with someone who is constantly pulling from you. So when we are aware of this and we're trying to figure out how to take these components and make it relatable to our building our trust and our building our community and our teams or whatever elements that you're using for this, we've got to be aware. This kind of goes back to that self-awareness. All right, what do I need to set myself up for if I know that I have to go have a meeting with a reportee of mine who's an energy suck, but I really need them to trust me throughout this process? When we're able to develop this trust around them and we are able to start to give more constructive feedback, that trust component helps people be more honest in providing specific feedback. You've got to build those bonds of trust first, though, and this is where we start to try and take this all from an awareness standpoint and wrap it up into a bow of understanding that our ability to understand emotional intelligence is, again, how do we recognize our own emotions and how do those relate to others? And then using it as okay, what do I need to be aware of for my own behavioral patterns? How do I show up in social situations? And then how do I start to build relationships through that? So again, if we all start this back with the fabric of trust and understanding how do we build these things, a lot of it starts with ourselves and how we're showing up. The way that we show up and understand ourselves allows other people a space for them to own their things, whatever that is, whether it's extrovert, introvert, road rage, you name it. We can have these little bonds that end up being the framework that set things up for success. So let's talk a little bit more into this. Let's get down to that foundation. So when we want to cultivate trust and value, this is where that environment piece is super important. You are responsible for the energy that you bring into a room. So if we go back to self-awareness and that self-regulation, and I tell you, like when I'm driving, I get upset, so I turn on music because it's nobody else's fault that I'm getting upset by the traffic, and anybody that I'm going to encounter after that event, that is going to be on me. So when I want to walk into a room, I'm responsible for that energy. And then my energy is going to set the tone for that environment of what's going to come next. So paying attention to this and your self-awareness and your self-regulation components, this is about that environment, starting even from an energy perspective. We know that there's people sometimes that come into rooms and we're like, oh, I'm not gonna cross them today. Sometimes it's tone, sometimes it's body language, you name it, but the way that your energy and the way that you are showing up into a physical space can gauge how trusting people are going to be and how their feelings are going to either be valued or what that's going to look like. Do I want to speak up in this meeting? Do I not? Okay, the tone is really hard, or maybe it's harsh or negative or something along those lines. I'm not going to feel super safe to come share ideas or give some new innovative ideas if I don't know how it's going to be received. And so when we're looking at this from a trust standpoint, what's that energy of the room read? So we look at that relationship management component and we look at that social awareness component. We know there are better days to say specific things than others, depending on the people, the moods, the energy, whatever that looks like. So if we want to be that strong foundation, how are you showing up to set the tone? Because if you're here right now, you obviously have some influence, and we want to think about that from that foundational component. How do you make that room feel like it's okay for people to express opinions, beliefs, innovation, ideas in a space where there's not going to be retaliation, there's not going to be any of that negative side? And so we look at it in that capacity. When we start to build more trust then, and we start looking at this from how do we build this? How do we resolve conflicts? So I told you most conflicts are because it's a violation of a value. If you think most organizations have like a corporate code of ethics, and we think about what are our own codes of ethics, what are our own values, organizations have those too. And so when we're starting to look at this and we start to build, like, how are we going to build this trust and have this culture around this? This is where your actions are big on this. So you showing up and leading with this trusting relationship, the way that you communicate, breaking down concepts in a way that everyone can understand, not just people that speak your language. Maybe if you're coming from finance and you speak in numbers, but you're working with different departments that don't speak that language, you build trust by increasing your communication, but it's a consumable communication. And this is also why it's really important when we're paying attention to the energy that we're bringing into a room and our physical demeanor, because people are also paying attention in that capacity as to how we digest that information, things that are really important. And this ends up helping. The more that you can build this, the more that we make conversation easier for people to share out, to express ideas, you name it. And we have an environment that cultivates this, our culture starts to shift. It also shows a resiliency, where resilience isn't about how much you can endure, but how quickly you can recover. So if we're sharing things or we've got an issue that comes up, how quickly can we come together, share some ideas, figure it out, and take actionable steps to move forward? This also can help increase teamwork, because if your team feels like they can communicate with each other and we're all working towards that shared value, those common goals, this helps that relationship component, getting to know people. How are you going to behave in this situation? Okay. I know on Mondays, Claire doesn't like those first 2 hours of the day. We want to make sure that that time is set for her. I'm not going to set a meeting where I'm going to give bad news at 10 a.m. in the morning. Maybe I'll wait until later on in the day. And we start to pay attention to just how humans behave. When are people better at doing things? And when we start to do that and we focus on those elements, this is where we start to hack into the science of what makes people tick, what makes them more receptible to take information in, and it increases people's engagement. Now, if we want to use this and we start to look at this foundational component and we relate it back to those 4 topics that we talked about: self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, and relationship management, this is where we want to, not only do we want to use these trust components as the foundation, but there's reflective practices that we can make this even better. So let's get into some of the science behind this. So with self-awareness, there are some reflective practices that we can use to understand our emotional triggers and our biases. So I want you guys to just reflect for just a moment on something that maybe an emotional response that you've had in a challenging situation. And you don't have to type it. I just want you to take a moment and think about this. So when we're looking at this and we take this reflection, what happened? What did you do? How did you feel in that moment? So I'll give one. So I spent a decent amount of time in corporate America, and there was one instance where I was sitting around a group of leaders. I was the only female, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything in this situation. So it is me, and I'm sitting around a table with 3 other gentlemen talking about claims management and some financial reserving issues. And one of the leaders did not enjoy the way that we had given some decision-making capacity to thinking outside the box, and they didn't respect it, which at this point, we're just going to share some factual information. Well, I'm a big believer as a leader that regardless of what decision a team member of mine makes, it ends up it's my decision as well. So I will absolutely advocate for the people on my team, and then if there's something that needs to be altered, we will talk about that behind closed doors. But in a leadership meeting or a leadership capacity, it is my obligation and responsibility to take the responsibility for my team's decisions. So we are talking through these scenarios, presenting our cases, going through the data. And I have one of the leaders that stops me and says, listen, you don't need to be so emotional about this. And so I've had some coaching from other people before. I understand that I'm a very passionate human being. So I stopped. I physically changed the way that my body was positioned. So I had been sitting back in my chair while we were talking about this. I uncrossed my legs, put my hands on the table, and I said, never mistake my passion for what I do as emotion that would over circumstance these facts that we're talking about. I'm very passionate about whatever I do or I don't do it, because again, time is important. But this is where we pay attention to, okay, I've been in a situation like this before. When people call you emotional, sometimes we will shut down and our brain gets hijacked because our emotions overwhelm our thinking brain. Well, how do you get yourself out of a situation like that? Right? We've got to physiologically change our dynamic. So if you're seated back, you move yourself forward. If your hands are down, put your hands on the table. You can press between your thumb and your index finger, can also help you start to break up that neural pathway of what is going on in that hijacked state. Something else you can do is you've got to figure out a way to get that emotion out of the fact part, because that's what's causing your brain this friction, and we can end up having a physiological response and it causes us to freeze. So what you want to do is find a way to jumpstart your brain. Sometimes this can take, you can just physiologically change your body. So again, seated back, seated forward, pressing, crossing your legs, uncrossing your legs, whatever that looks like, standing up, sitting down, etc. Something else you can do is look around the room and try and find something that you can count. Maybe it's red objects, and try and pick out 5 red objects. What you're trying to do in these situations is get yourself out of this hijacked position and jumpstart your brain back into logic. And so if we can understand this from a self-awareness standpoint, this helps us if we are then around our team members who end up being in a position like that. You now know what is happening to them. And we see this happen a lot more in meetings than I think we give it credit for. When we have people that want to talk or don't want to talk, or if someone gets shut down, maybe somebody gets spoken over, you name it, or somebody's idea gets shot down. If we're trying to build trust in this area, this is where we start to understand, okay, what would cause us to shut down in a situation like that? And how do we rise above, understand what's going on to that person, and try and help them along in a situation like this? And the more that you're able to understand like how you physically react to something like this, it helps you, one, coach, train, develop other people, but two, in the moments where this happens, you can then bring them along and get them right back on track because you understand what is going on with them. Just something that can help from a self-awareness standpoint. Then when we start to look at this from a science and we start looking at that self-regulation, again, we want to make sure that not only are we able to jumpstart our brain back, but our regulation, if we are starting to feel things, or we see that one of our team members is starting to get agitated, or we start to hear tone changing in voices, having people's back looks differently. But this can also be one of those times where you're just like, let's take a couple deep breaths together. And it can be small and it can be insignificant in that moment, like maybe just like a touch on the shoulder or whatnot to trigger, to be like, hey, let's just take a couple deep breaths. Or maybe you just lead by example and start taking these deep breaths to try and signal to the other people, like, hey, we're going to just take a beat. Not everyone is going to be as outgoing about talking about this, but these are the things that will start to help your nervous system kind of calm down, help your team members. And we bring everybody back into the table of these scenarios where emotions get high and we feel values get triggered and there can be some conflict that exists. But in doing this, and in showing up for people, this is what I would call having people's back. You are able to then start to build trust with them because they know what is going to trigger you. and that they know that if you're in the room with them or you're in a situation with them, you are showing up for them in the best way that you can by empowering them through skill sets that you have learned about yourself and how you can identify and see this in them. This also helps from an empathy standpoint, where we're looking at the importance of observing social cues. So again, if we're presenting maybe a project to a senior leader that is not receiving this well, this is where we help with that. We're modeling it. We are practicing active listening. And when I say active listening, that means listening with your whole body. So think about right now, how are you seated in front of your computer? Are your shoulders facing mine? If we were in person, active listening would reflect that we would be mimicking some of our similar body language, where my shoulders would be facing you. Sometimes we talk to people and we're turned away, and that sends a very different message from a listening standpoint than acting like we are fully present and fully engaged. Have a phone out, computer out, you name it. A lot of stuff can impact the way that we hear the messaging that is coming across. But again, if we're leading by example, we are the ones that have the phone out of sight, out of mind. We're fully present, listening, engaging physically, as well as listening with our ears. Then we look at that relationship component and how that builds into the science of this, where we're building rapport. This is having open feedback. And when we talk about open feedback, clear is kind, like Brene Brown said. Feedback is a gift, and also we can all be better at it. Saying something in the moment instead of waiting 3 months or thinking about it is really crucial. Timing is very crucial when we're giving people feedback. People like very specific feedback. This is not just negative. This is positive feedback too. If you see something, say something. Very easy when you're influencing people or with a leader, you just have to take that action. So if we go back to the beginning and we start talking about that emotional intelligence component and we look at self-awareness and self-regulation, it is super great when you identify, here's your self-awareness part. Oh, since Debbie already spoke up, Debbie had a great response to what the definition of emotional intelligence is. I should tell Debbie that. It's the action part that a lot of us miss out on. And that's where we start to not have as good of human connection as we could. So if I'm sitting in a meeting with Debbie, I would shoot her an email after this and say, hey, that was really great. Great job speaking up today, or thanks for doing that. Saying thank you, identifying something that goes well. If you like somebody's project, presentation, you name it. When you're trying to build this trust with people, saying something in the moment helps build that bond so that when you have to give feedback, they know it's true, they know it's specific, and they understand what you are doing. This means you give feedback both ways, both the positive and the constructive, so that when you are giving specifics and you're really focusing on that specificity to give people that information, you're trying to give it to them as a, hey, I don't know that you're aware of this. So we're trying to increase that self-awareness component by you self-regulating yourself and giving that behavioral action. You are then showing people how to do this. And if you do give feedback and it's constructive in a positive way or a way that they can improve, they're going to start to trust what you say because you are investing. You're investing your time. You're trying to make them better. And this is where intent does matter. You're not just saying it to drag somebody down, but I'm trying to increase the feedback component so that people know, hey, you're doing this really well. Most people don't hear that they're doing a good job on a regular basis. The last study that I paid attention to on this was pre-pandemic, but it was like 87% of employees had not heard good job from their leader. And that was in 2019. So add in the pandemic. Oh my goodness. I'm sure that we have shot this down even more so. So we want to think about, how do we show up? How are we giving our feedback? How does this tie into our our self-awareness, and then our self-regulation of being like, okay, I just thought this. I thought this about Debbie's comment. I'm going to then tell Debbie this because it is going to increase. Maybe Debbie will speak up in more meetings. Maybe Debbie is going to give different ideas because she got some validation on this. And when we think about how this builds trust within our teams, it gives that catalyst or that snowball effect of, okay, if I'm going to positively enforce this, this means it's a safe space for me to share. I'm going to be getting feedback. Hey, I liked this. Hey, this was done really well. Hey, this is the specific that outlines into what this meeting was, what this presentation was, and how you showed up was really beneficial. This also helps you build rapport so that when you are giving specific feedback that is relevant, again, specific, relevant, focused on the issue with an intent of making this person better, this is how you start to build that professional rapport. And then people trust what you're saying because you're giving this feedback timely, you're doing it constructively, and you are helping people move forward. So, some things to think about as we continue this road. So, let's get into the neuroscience. So, of course, not only do we have like the science of the physiology and how we feel and our emotions and regulating our brain and our neuroplasticity, but guess what? When you trust someone else, it releases oxytocin, and that's a neurotransmitter and a bonding hormone that strengthens our social connections. Now, this is important to think about from a couple of standpoints. So, one, when we release certain neurotransmitters, they tend to make us happy, bring joy, spark feelings that are good or positive feelings. Now, this can be done in a plethora of ways, but we're focusing heavily on trust and how do we build that through emotional intelligence today. But when you get that and you get that neurotransmitter dump, that oxytocin release, that bonding hormone, because I genuinely trust what you're going to say, what you're going to do, that you're going to have my back, that you're going to be there for me. This helps increase your employee engagement. Novel concept. If we trust our leaders, we have a better engagement. Craziness. But something that we have to actually focus on and understand is how that actually impacts how we show up in our workplace and what we are doing with that. So, focusing on that neuroscience, focusing on this, and that trust really means here's a space. I'm going to have your back as long as we are not falling outside of like ethical parameters or doing the right thing, things along those lines. This is an easy space to sit in. We just have to lead by example of showing that this matters. One of the other ways that we can do this is when we're strengthening those social connections, we're looking for who is this person? What can I dive into that helps me understand the way that they behave better? Now, some will argue that this is getting to know your people on a personal level, but you're going to have people that don't want you to know them at that. The personal level that we're looking at when we're trying to build these type of bonds, or is what are the behavioral patterns that I notice if when? So again, if I set a meeting at 4:30 on a Friday, who's going to get upset by that? Okay. Most people hate that. They don't want the last minute meetings. They don't want it on a Friday. We start to pay attention to people's behavior. So then if let's say that we've built some trust and we've done a really good job with communication and something like this does arise, if I am going to send, sorry, I'm just going to go to Debbie again. If I'm going to send Debbie a 4:30 meeting on Friday, she's going to know that I need this. Or then when we ask somebody for something, if we have those bonds that are already established, they then understand, okay, this must be serious. They trust me enough to be able to do this. So some things that are important that we think about throughout this. Okay, so let's link this to some more behavioral patterns because great, this stuff's wonderful in theory, Claire, but what do you want us to actually do? So let's talk about what practice looks like. When we're looking at self-awareness, this starts again with us. What are our strengths and what are our vulnerabilities? All right, this is where, and then we're open with that. We build our teams around knowing that this might not be a strength of mine, but that's why I have this person here, or that's where I have this person here. One of my favorite teams that I ever worked on, I had 3 leaders that were underneath me in an organization, and on the disc, each one of us was a different letter. And it made sense because we worked really well as a collective team. Well, I'm totally fine with putting amazing people in for my weak areas. Like, I'm not a logistics person. When it comes to event planning and whatnot, Erin Quinn Stevens can laugh at this one because she knows I hate it. But there are people that are so good at this, and I respect them and I honor them, and I'm so grateful for them. It is not my strong suit. I like to be that visionary of here's what it's going to look like, here's how we're going to get there, and go more on that strategy spot versus those individual little moments that we have to pay attention to. So being open, knowing that, again, here comes back to that whole core of self-awareness. Do you know yourself well enough to know what your strengths are, where your opportunity areas lie? And then are you comfortable enough with yourself to not see that as a downside, but to understand that that actually builds trust within your team? When you say, hey, that's not my strong suit, or understanding that you being vulnerable in certain situations is actually a strength, not a weakness that people are going to come at you for. Things to think about. That self-regulation piece. So we've got our awareness, we're looking at our human behavior, our own human behavior, and how we're showing up within our teams and our organizations. this is where you got to stay calm. And this is, again, I'm telling you, we can physiologically change things, but at some point, people are going to violate one of your values in a specific issue, specific to an issue. And we've got to figure out, how do you keep yourself calm? One of the other things that I like to do is get up and go move around. So one of the ways that I like to focus on resiliency is to get myself out in nature. That restores my bank. It absolutely fuels me. I feel better as a result of being in nature. I like to move. The human body likes to be moved. So pay attention to your movement throughout the day. But I feel like I'm a better leader and I stay calm under pressure when I have been physically moving. Now, there is research around this on how most of us are kinesthetic processors, meaning you do better with movement because our bodies need it. But this is something that I definitely pay attention to. If I am working out an issue or a strategy that I've got to present and I just can't get from point A to point B, and I've talked it out with people, I will go for a walk or go for a hike or whatever that is, because it helps me get through it. And it helps me get to that point B in thinking of ways that I wouldn't before. So what does that look like for you? How do you figure out what's going to take you into that calm space? And then how do you start to restore yourself? And this is where we start to look at building our resiliency quotient. What do you need to restore yourself? How often do you need it? We talk a lot about meditation, and a lot of people are like, I just don't have the time for that. Okay, but can you take a couple of deep breaths in a moment when you start to feel your heart rate increase, or when you start to feel yourself not loving the situation that you're in? What do you do to combat that? And also, I'm very well aware that there are certain situations where someone's going to cross you, and we just don't have enough self-reliance in that bank left at the end of the day. And sometimes we snap at people. What are you going to do after that? How do you then regulate yourself to come back and own that, effectively apologize? And we'll talk about that in a second. And then social awareness. Okay. So again, if we focused on these elements for ourselves, how do we then see it within other people? And how do we start to take that awareness of understanding like our own shortcomings and our own plethora of opportunities that exist in social situations, as well as recognizing that with other people? And then lastly, if we start to apply all of this, and this is how we start to build these positive interactions with people. A lot of this is an internal job. How are you showing up? How are you handling your stuff? How are you making sure that you're coming in with your best foot forward? Because how you feel about yourself is going to be read by the energy that you bring into a room and the energy that you exchange with other people. So if we're trying to build positive interactions and linking trust into this EQ space, this is where your responsibility for self-regulation really becomes important to start to build those positive interactions. So let's think about this for you. This is our interactive part here right now. With component number 1, we've got that self-awareness. So again, we talked about this, recognize your emotions, how they impact your actions. So I want you to think about your personal values and how they have influenced your behavior. So think of a recent emotional response. How did that affect your interaction? And if anyone has an example that they are willing to share, love to hear it. Also, we can have that chat bot, or you can throw it in the chat, excuse me. Anyone think of a recent emotional response? And also, I am aware that this is being recorded, so if you do not want to share, it's completely understandable. Okay, I'm going to give an example. I have a very best friend who lives in Atlanta, which is why I joke about the Des Moines to Atlanta traffic, because whenever I complain about traffic, she likes to tell me, well, if you lived in Atlanta, this would be your normal. I'm like, yeah, but I choose to live in Iowa, so this is why it's my not normal. But we joke about that. But we had talked about there are certain times where our emotions get really high in dealing with things that we find really important or something that we value. And that there are times, there's this saying that has been passed around quite a bit that's like, you can be happy or you can be right. And so we've thought about that. And I also have an almost 16-year-old daughter. And so there are days where I'm like, you can be happy or you can be right. All right, do you want to start this fight, or are we going to just leave today in a good capacity? And so in those moments, there are certain times where I will self-regulate and just say, you know what? I'm going to let you have that one. Because what I'm running through my mind is this worthwhile for me to spend my energy on getting you to see either my side, my point, my perspective, or is it just, okay, you know what, you're going to believe what you're going to believe with the situation and the experiences that you've had. I've got mine. This is not worth my energy to try and go back and forth with. So something to think about. So I did that earlier today. It's like, you know what? I'm gonna let you have that one today. And I just walked away from the situation. Sometimes this can be really powerful. Other times it is hard to remember that there are certain moments where you just want to right fight and other times where does this really matter? And I like to look at this from an energy perspective. I talk a lot about energy, but when we wake up in the morning, we have a bank of energy for the day, depending on how well you've slept, how much you've moved the last day, how well your nutrition is. This is the life force pyramid. So how full is your life force pyramid based on the decisions you made yesterday? That gives you your energy for the day ahead. Now, if I know that there's big presentations or there's things that I need to do, am I going to fight with my daughter about dishes in the sink before I even go to work in the morning? Probably not. But there are other days where I'm not going to have a lot of stuff going on that I might be like, you know what? Not today. Put the dishes in the sink. You know, it just depends on the situation. Where do you want to spend your energy? How are you going to focus it? And what are you going to do that? Erin gives a comment. We have an annual ladies trip and one of them chose not to go. And I realized I don't need to take it personally. Absolutely. Most people's behavior isn't a result of others. It's what's going on inside. And that this is where people say, don't take it personally. And we always do take it personal. There could be 1,000 other things going on with other people. And this is where it's like, okay, you know what? Do I have the energy? Where do I want to focus my energy? And sometimes it's easier. We can either deal with it, fix it, change it, shape it, shift it, whatever we need, or we need to let it go. All right, component 2, this is our self-regulation. We've talked about our breathing techniques. We talked about some other physiological changes that you can make. Stand up, sit down, uncross your legs, recross your legs, seated back, seated forward, arms on the table, arms underneath the table. All right, how do you regulate yourself during these high stress moments? How many things can you pick out right now around your room that are green, wherever you're seated? Ways you can hijack your brain to get yourself under control, taking those deep breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth. What does this look like? Keep your feet. Can you feel your feet planting into the ground? Can you roll your shoulders back and down? Figure out what that reset is going to look like for you so that you can keep your composure. We got our social awareness, and we talked about our active listening and our reflective listening and the art of listening. Okay, congratulations. Hearing is, you have ears, you can hear. That's wonderful. But also, what are you taking in? Are you listening for the last word? Do you repeat some of the same language, like 3 to 5 words of what that person is sharing with you so that you can validate their experience? When people feel that they are actually being heard and they are being validated throughout their human experience, so coming to you with an issue, asking you for some time for you to offer your perspective back, making sure that that is intentional. I'm not kidding when I tell you, move your phone out of sight. It will help people feel more valid. And guess what? Flipping it over is not good enough. Actually getting it out of sight, out of mind. Also, if you've got a computer, maybe your office has a laptop, can you shut the laptop when someone's in so that they know that they have your undivided attention? I will also caveat that the flip side can be true. If you need someone to leave and people aren't necessarily socially aware, having that phone out, keeping that computer up, not looking up, you know, this works both ways for things like that. So paying attention to body language and social cues, again, can go both ways on our beautiful spectrum here. Listen for that last word, but listen fully. Listen to the last word, listening to understand what is being said, not listening to respond. We all know when we do it too. And then that relationship management, positive, open, authentic interactions. Don't do things that you aren't passionate about or you don't care about or you can't give yourself fully. Now, not always easy at work, but when we're starting to look at building our relationships where we have the ability to choose, like if you don't want to go to dinner, or you don't want to go on that girls trip or whatever that might be, whatever's going on in your life, then don't do it. Stop forcing yourself to do things that don't fuel you, that don't give you that drive or that innate power. We do a lot of things because we think we should do them versus actually taking ownership of, I am choosing to do this. You are either going to choose things or you are not going to choose things. Life does not just happen to you. We do things through active choice, or even that path of least resistance is still a choice. Understanding that And then figuring out how we can embrace that so you can have more positive, open, authentic conversations. People should always know where they stand on your team. There should never be a surprise when we're going through scorecards, we're doing monthly reports or whatnot. If there is an issue, you need to be brave enough to figure out how to address it. And if you aren't, find a way to get better at it, offering that constructive feedback and giving people, hey, I need to see this, or this needs to be a little bit more improved, or I'd add some depth here. You need more objectives here, or objectivity here. Giving people that feedback is honest for their success. That helps strengthen the feedback. And also people will respect you more in the process because you were willing to have the harder conversations with them in the moment. So think about that from your own standpoint. How do you approach tough conversations? Do you hit them head on? Sometimes we need 24 hours ourselves to figure out how to have them. Practicing them with someone else, practicing them with yourself in the mirror, all establishes this neural pathway, different neural pathways, so that when you go and actually have this conversation with someone, whether it be online, an email, on a phone, you name it, it's going to be done in a better capacity. So again, let's reminder on a couple of these things, applying EQ in the trust building area. We're using it to strengthen our bonds. The way that we apply these emotional intelligence techniques is important in how we build trust with other people and also within yourself. Heads up, start with yourself. Transparent communication, saying what you mean to say, having some vulnerability within boundaries, and actively listening. Now, when I say actively listening from a self-awareness standpoint, pay attention to what your body is telling you. Your body is telling you things on a regular basis. It's reading energy, it's reading the room, it's reading how you feel, and it is telling you things on a regular basis. Start active listening to yourself so that you can get better at reading what's going on with other people as well. All right. So also you can encourage people to openly share in a low risk setting. What does that mean? When we start to do this, when we look at having people that we want to have our teams have open feedback, open dialogue, and we want to build this trustful area, we start with things that are very low risk, meaning that this is an area that you can build psychological safety, meaning there is low stakes and that the outcome is not going to have any retribution or retaliation that could possibly be affiliated with it. So you could start something like, all right, we're going to plan a group activity. How do we do this? Or something that could be a low risk setting that's easy, low hanging fruit that can help build the bonds with the team. Maybe it's just an activity where you get out of the office and go do something fun together. Finding activities, community building, philanthropy, whatever that can look like. And we start to just talk about life and who we are and what is life like for you. So finding different ways that you can do that. And then looking at what does a safe space mean for your organization and your dynamic, and how are you cultivating that in a team? Sometimes I've heard people that'll do open forums, but the leaders stay in the open forum. Okay, if we want to let our teams talk openly and freely, maybe you think about removing the leadership and having someone from that open forum that's going to be participating be the one that's the provider of information. Things to think about on how we approach this. So how do we create a culture of trust? We've got to start by modeling it. This is where we are reliable and consistent, doing what we say we're going to do, showing up the way that we want to, so that we can encourage this to be done with our teams. So leaders and team members alike, we want consistent behavior, not just the one-offs, not just when things go bad, but following through on commitments. This again comes back to self-awareness and self-regulation. How well do you hold yourself accountable? And how well do you show up for yourself? You got to show up for you first before you can start doing this for other people. Then we're going to build that safe environment, have that the low risk that we talked about, so that people feel comfortable bringing ideas, sharing concerns. And then what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with that information? And if you do make a change, or you do alter something, or you do take an idea up the chain, do you come back and tell people, hey, I did this, so that people know that you're doing what you say you're going to do? And this will end up helping the resilience in your teams, knowing that everything is figure outable, creating this for those long-term success. Now, remember, sometimes there's going to be conflicts that are going to arise. This is where we want to make sure we apologize for what's transpired, be very clear on what we are going to do differently or what is going to happen as a result, and then follow through. So let's say you said I was going to do X, Y, and Z. It didn't get done. What are you going to do to remedy the situation? I'm sorry that took you time. I'm sorry that situation happened. Apologizing for the behavior that has impacted your team, your group, your organization, or that relationship. And we try to restore that trust by then clarifying what we are apologizing for from a behavioral standpoint, and then making a change or an action item that will come as a result. And then you actually have to do that. Otherwise, your apology doesn't mean anything, and people aren't going to trust you in that element as well. So things to think about: we offer an apology, validate, and then listen if there's any other feedback that somebody might have for you in one of these situations. Validating the other person's feelings throughout this process is also super important. So we've got that real rebuilding of trust. This is where we're interacting with our people. We're trying to make something right after a conflict, and we go through that element. So things to take away today: EQ is that foundation for trust, transparency, communication, bonds with your people. Self-awareness and self-regulation lead to these authentic relationships. Got to start inside first, and then you can go on the outside. And this trust-based culture does take work. It takes effort, it takes energy, and it takes intentionality. So making sure your actions are intentional along the way.